Our speakers will be Andriy Yermak, Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Mary Garland, U.S. Prosecutor General, Zbigniew Ziobro, Minister of Justice, General Prosecutor of Poland, Victoria Prentice, Attorney General for England and Wales, Advocate General for Northern Ireland, Laura Kövesi, European Chief Prosecutor, Beth Van Schaak, Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice. Moderator of this discussion also will be Andrei Kostin, Prosecutor General. So, a few moments till we solve our technical issues and we will continue. And also, I kindly remind to our participants that we are actually pretty much out of timing, so please consider it. Thank you. So please, dear speakers, take your seats. It's not a problem. Mr. Kostin, I may give you one.
Thank you. We are opening our conference, and our opening session is dedicated to the international community's response to accountability. Accountability is difficult to achieve by our own. It is the most effective when it is sought through building an alliance, a strong legal front, having a vision and dedication. You would all agree this is the case today. It is paramount that our cooperation on international level, which is a constant and uninterrupted process, moves forward and enhances. Only then can we attain our objectives. With this, I wish to pass the floor to Mr. Andriy Yermak, Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine.
Дякую. Чи мені...
Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, esteemed Mr. President, esteemed First Lady, participants of this esteemed gathering, gathered here today. We are gathered here united by one goal. We are united for justice. So we are all like-minded people, and I'm very happy to welcome you. Thank you for being here. Justice shall save the world. Only an effective system of international justice can spare Rad from another global massacre. First of all, the International Criminal Tribunal for the aggressor. I will revisit this later, but first let me ask you a rhetorical question. What is home for you? I guess you would agree with me that a home is a place where we live, a place where we feel safe. Usually, People do not expect a night's sleep to last forever, but the fear of not waking up is one of the realities that Ukrainians are living today. For thousands of people in Ukraine, their own homes have turned into their own graves, often the graves together with their families. A few days ago, the Russian missile hit another ordinary residential building at 4 o'clock in the morning, this time in Zaporizhia. The terrorists in uniform have killed innocent people yet again, as they have been doing systematically, not only for the last year, but also for the previous 8 years. Terror against the civilian population, taking hostages, torture, extrajudicial killing and mass murder are one of the key elements of the Russian strategy. As been said, over the last year alone, we have registered over 70,000 war crimes and crimes against humanity. In every settlement we have deoccupied, we find numerous graves with traces of violent death. It is yet impossible to determine the number of deaths now, but the count goes into tens of thousands. Russians are methodically destroying our civilian infrastructure. The calculation is straightforward: to cause a humanitarian catastrophe, to create inhumane living conditions for the millions of Ukrainians. In the fall and the winter, they have repeatedly carried out strikes on the energy facilities in Ukraine to plunge Ukrainians into the icy darkness. But we have endured. And it's spring now. Ukraine was rescued by the strength of the people's spirit, the sacrifice of our soldiers, the selfless work of the power engineers, and the assistance from our international partners. Given these opportunities, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all our partners. The deliberate destruction of the hospitals, schools and universities, the annihilation of cultural monuments is carried out on a scale that leaves no doubt that this is part of their plan. There's another plan, and it's difficult to talk about it without the emotions. These are the mass rapes, the mass deportations, the mass kidnapping of our children, the mass indoctrination of the young Ukrainians who were forcibly taken to Russia. Today, more than 16,000 cases of forced deportation of the Ukrainian children have already been registered. And these are only the documented cases. Children are forcibly separated from their parents, taken to filtration camps, taken to the torture basements, and then sent to Russia, as the occupiers hope, forever. But the Ukrainian law enforcement, together with our international partners, are already investigating these crimes. The International Criminal Court is already working and shall bring to justice the specific perpetrators of genocide and war crimes. However, we need a system, a comprehensive and inclusive approach. And I can say with certainty, since you're here, you're definitely on the bright side. And you know perfectly well how important it is to unite people from all over the world for our common security. And our common security cannot be achieved without justice. The international element of the network is something we have brought up a number of times today, but I will say it again. It has to become an international tribunal for those who have committed the core, the mainstream crime, the crime of aggression, which is the centerpiece of all the other crimes, the war crimes, the genocide, the crimes against humanity. In January, the work on the establishment of the tribunal has gained momentum. The European Parliament called for the establishment of the tribunal without the slightest delay. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe once again voted in favor of the establishment of the tribunal and explicitly stated that the International Criminal Court cannot prosecute for the crime of aggression. The Hague City Hall approved the location of the tribunal in the city. The 21 group held the first meeting of the core group to discuss the model for the operation of the tribunal. In soon, nearest future, the interim prosecutor's office shall start operating in The Hague to collect evidence of the crime of aggression. We are also waiting for a very important resolution to come from the UN General Assembly that shall call for the punishment of Russia for the crime of aggression. We must punish those who started this war, punish them in a meaningful and demonstrative way, because the aggressor will not stop on his own, and the others will know that there are no more rules in the world. Therefore, everything is allowed, up to the destruction of the entire states and people. I'd like to say that with the aggression, Russia did not attack Ukraine alone. The energy war with Ukraine, the nuclear blackmail of the world, and the blackmail of hunger of the most vulnerable regions, the incredible scale of environmental damage. This is what has already happened and what is still happening on a daily basis before our eyes. And what can happen if those who share the Kremlin's cannibalistic paradigm unite forces, replacing the rule of law with the rule of might, will inevitably lead to a new world war. And the International Tribunal is the safest way to prevent it. But let me give you some details. Some countries have called for the creation of a hybrid tribunal instead of the full-fledged mechanism. Ukraine cannot accept this proposal. This option is completely unacceptable for us, because we have no guarantees that that will allow us to lift the immunity of the leadership of the terrorist country, and that is the main problem with this hybrid project. The other two options are to create a special tribunal on the basis of an agreement between Ukraine and the UN with the adoption of the relevant resolution of the General Assembly, or to create a tribunal on the basis of a multilateral open international agreement between the states of the civilized world. These two options are acceptable and demonstrate the world's readiness to deal a strong legal blow to the specific international criminals. The world needs the broadest international institution of accountability for aggression with the highest level of legitimacy and recognition. In this way, and only this way, we shall remove all the controversial issues, including the personal and functional immunity of those who have unleashed this war and those continuing to wage it. I urge everyone to show personal leadership in this matter, and I'm certain that justice shall prevail and shall save our world. Thank you so much. Glory to Ukraine.
Дуже дякую, Андрію Борисовичу.
Thank you very much.
Mary Garland, Attorney General of the United States. Attorney General Garland, once again, welcome to Ukraine. We deeply value U.S. support and your presence here as a testament of close partnership between our states and our institutions. I understand you have a message you'd like to give to our audience. As a part of that message, can you tell us why Department of Justice thought it was so important to attend this conference today?
Is this on?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, thank you. I do have a somewhat longer message, but I'm happy to start with answering the question of why I'm here. I'm here because the battles that Ukrainians are fighting in Ukraine are not only for Ukraine. They are for all democracies and everybody who loves freedom, and we stand with you. I'm here because we want you to know that you are not alone, that we will stand shoulder to shoulder with you in your effort and in the world's effort to bring accountability to those responsible for the atrocities in Ukraine. And I'm here to let you know that we stand with you. If you'll indulge me, I have a little bit longer statement to make as well. I'm not used to this. They told me this was Davos style. And having never been to Davos and never wanting to go to Davos, I'm probably not exactly prepared. Andre and esteemed colleagues, it's an honor to be here on behalf of the United States and on behalf of the United States Department of Justice. Just over 12 months ago, invading Russian forces began committing atrocities at the largest scale in any armed conflict since World War II. We are here today in Ukraine to speak clearly and with one voice. The perpetrators of those crimes will not get away with them. 30 years ago, at the dedication of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the late Nobel Prize winner and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel issued a charge. For the dead and for the living, he said, we must bear witness. For the past year, our colleagues in the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office have risked their lives to bear witness. Ukrainian prosecutors and investigators have worked tirelessly to uncover the truth of what is happening here in Ukraine and to preserve and record it for future generations. They have meticulously collected and cataloged evidence from the rubble of blast sites, including hospitals, apartment buildings, and schools. They have worked urgently to seek justice on behalf of the thousands of Ukrainian men, women, and children who have been killed. They have exhumed mass graves and carefully studied the bodies of victims in order to tell the stories of those who no longer can. They have documented the Russian regime's forced deportation of Ukrainian children and its use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. They have worked relentlessly to pursue accountability for these crimes and to make clear the costs of perpetrating them. They have opened investigations, identified and tracked down suspects, and initiated prosecutions. And they are only just getting started. In bearing witness, Ukrainian prosecutors, like the Ukrainian people, have stood courageously in defense of democracy and in defense of the rule of law. The United States Department of Justice is honored to stand beside you. And we are honored to stand here today beside our international partners as well. The courage of the Ukrainian people has inspired us all, and it has galvanized cooperation in the international community to hold the Russian regime accountable for its crimes. Just now, the United States signed an historic agreement with Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Slovakia, and Romania that will strengthen our efforts to hold Russian war criminals accountable. This agreement will expand information sharing between our countries that will help us not only to identify and prosecute Russian war criminals, but to build winning cases against them. In addition to strengthening our international partners, the United States is working more closely than ever with our Ukrainian partners in our investigations of Russian war crimes. Together, American and Ukrainian prosecutors have zeroed in on specific crimes committed by Russian forces, including attacks on civilian targets. We are working to identify not only the individuals who carried out these attacks, but those who ordered the attacks. As part of this effort, the Department's human rights prosecutors are providing advice and assistance to the Prosecutor General's office on specific cases. Our environmental crimes prosecutors are training their Ukrainian counterparts on the investigation and prosecution of potential environmental war crimes. And we are partnering together to apply the lessons that the Justice Department has learned from its own complex criminal investigations to assist the Prosecutor General's office in developing a secure electronic case management and analysis system. This is not the first time that the Justice Department has worked with the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office to hold accountable those who committed atrocities in Ukraine. 30 years ago, the U.S. Justice Department and the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office signed an agreement similar to one that Prosecutor General Kostin and I signed today, or signed in Washington last fall, and then joined in the JIT today. In 1993, the goal of that agreement was to deepen our country's cooperation in cases involving Nazi war crimes. As a result, the Justice Department and the Prosecutor General's office worked together to prove atrocity crimes in Nazi-occupied Ukraine. This was integral to the Justice Department's own decades-long effort to identify, denaturalize, and deport Nazi war criminals in the United States. All told, the Office of Special Investigations brought more than 130 cases against the perpetrators of Nazi war crimes. The Justice Department and the American people have a long memory. I am proud that I successfully persuaded the same prosecutor who led the Justice Department's work to investigate Nazi atrocity crimes to lead the department's current efforts to investigate atrocity crimes in Ukraine. I announced that effort, the War Crimes Accountability Team, when I visited Ukraine last June. The U.S. Justice Department is also deploying our resources to hold accountable those whose criminal act enable and facilitate Russia's continued brutality. In March of last year, I launched the Justice Department's task force, KleptoCapture. That team of prosecutors, agents, analysts, translators, professional staff, and law enforcement partners has been busy seizing assets, executing arrests, and bringing prosecutions against sanctioned enablers of the Kremlin and the Russian military. Last month, I authorized the United States' first ever transfer of seized assets to the United States Department of State to support the rebuilding of Ukraine. There will be more to come. In addition to our work in partnership with Ukraine and the international community, the United States has also opened criminal investigations into war crimes in Ukraine that may violate U.S. law. Although we are still building our cases, interviewing witnesses, and collecting evidence, we have already identified several specific suspects. Our prosecutors are working day and night to bring them to justice as quickly as possible. What is happening here in Ukraine has significantly reshaped the way the United States thinks about war crimes accountability. Till recently, our jurisdiction over war crimes was limited to cases in which a U.S. national was a victim or perpetrator. But earlier this year, in the wake of Russia's campaign of brutality, Congress enacted a change in the law that will allow the U.S. Department of Justice to prosecute alleged war criminals from anywhere in the world who are found in the United States, and we intend to do so. This means that in the years and decades ahead, Russian war criminals who set foot in our country should expect to find themselves in U.S. courts of law. War criminals will find no refuge in the United States. In courageously defending itself against an authoritarian regime, Ukraine has demonstrated the stakes that we all have in the success of democracy and the rule of law. The United States recognizes that what happens here in Ukraine will have a direct impact on the strength of our own democracy. That is why, in addition to ensuring accountability for individual war crimes, the United States also supports efforts by the international community to ensure that individuals responsible for crimes of aggression are held accountable. In doing so, we can and we should look to the model established by the International Tribunal at Nuremberg nearly 8 decades ago. In that effort, the United States and its allies demonstrated their faith in the rule of law to hold accountable those who perpetrated some of the worst crimes in history. That effort was led by one of my most illustrious predecessors, Robert Jackson. Our presence today is proof that our faith in the rule of law has not wavered. My grandmother was one of 5 children born not far from here in what is now Belarus. 3, including my grandmother, made it to the United States long before the Nazis invaded. But 2 did not make it, and those 2 were killed in the Holocaust. My family does not know exactly when or where they were killed. We do not know if anyone involved in their deaths was ever held accountable. The families and descendants of the victims of the current atrocities in Ukraine deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. They deserve justice. Today, members of the international community have joined together here in Ukraine to bear witness to the atrocities being committed by Russian forces. We have come here to remember and reaffirm the humanity of the individuals who have been victimized by Russia's brutal crimes. And we have come here to seek justice and accountability under the law for all of those who bear responsibility for those crimes. Fulfilling those tasks will demand an enormous amount of work, not only from the Ukrainian people and their leaders, but also from the entire international community. It will require painstaking attention to the details of individual crimes, sifting through enormous amounts of rapidly mounting evidence, and a relentless commitment to justice. And it will require us to continue to adhere to and put our trust in the rule of law. The United States is in this for the long haul. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, dear Attorney General, and thank you for sharing with us the story of your family. We talked today that it's our obligation, victims of this war, and it's our obligation for the future generations, for them not to be victims. But you remind to all of us that this is also our obligation before those who were killed, tortured, who lost their life as a result of war crimes committed long ago. And thank you for reminding us this. And I believe that together we will create this system which will really punish all the war criminals of this war and deter any future aggressor to hold aggression and war crimes. And now I wish to turn to our dear friend and colleague Zbigniew Ziobro, Minister of Justice and General Prosecutor of Poland. Ukraine deeply values support and assistance provided by Polish government and Polish people. Poland has been the first country to activate its accountability mechanisms against Russian atrocities and open investigation into the crime of aggression on 28th of February 2022. Minister Zobra, could you briefly describe investigative efforts into international crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine? And it would be important to hear your opinion regarding the position voiced by some that in order to end the war, some concessions should be made.
Thank you.
Mr. President, honorary guests, dear Andrei, it's a great honor to participate in this very important event which carries optimism in these tragic circumstances and times, with the atrocities and terrible crimes that are being by the Russian invader. We saw a moment ago the evidence of injured bodies and children, women, children. This is so expressive and utterly horrible. But before we speak about our co-activities on explaining these terrible crimes and atrocities, and of course bringing them, the criminals and perpetrators, in front of the courts, I would like to say a few reflections about the genesis of these events, these atrocities which touch the Ukrainians. Criminologists say for many times that to prevent a crime, you have to make the perpetrator aware of the fact that it's not worthwhile to commit a crime, that a perpetrator and bringing them to justice, to accountability, will be unavoidable. If we look at everything that is happening today and which happened from the 24th of February last year and even earlier in the Ukraine, one must come to a certain reflection or even scientific truths of criminology, which I mentioned here. I would like to refer and remind the Lech Kaczynski's 15 years ago in Tbilisi quote, who said a very important thing. He said, "Today, Georgia, tomorrow, Ukraine. Tomorrow, the day after, the Baltic states, and later, also perhaps Poland." So, President Lech Kaczynski, along with the leaders of Ukraine, Litva, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, went to Tbilisi to give solidarity, support, and to protest against the military aggression of Russia, which attacked a sovereign country, breaking international law and also committing crimes. And during their statements every time there in Georgia, 15 years ago, they appealed that the international community, that the free world would react definitively. That lack of a reaction, unfortunately, means that there will be a tomorrow and a day after tomorrow, and there will be some dramatic consequences for all of international society. If we look at the perspective of what has happened over the years, and what we must say that these reactions beyond words, there were none, and the perpetrators were they did not take the consequences of that attack, of that aggressive attack. And it showed that the day after tomorrow had to occur. And it happened much faster than many believed it would. And that is that in 2014, Putin decided to continue to test the free world and did a hybrid attack on Ukraine. First overall, taking over Crimea, and then Donbass, and continuing with his plans. He observed once again how the world is reacting. Is it going to be a decided response? Is there going to be a hard reaction? Are there going to be sanctions in place? Are there going to be those bringing to responsibility and accountability for their crimes? Unfortunately, from that test, he also came to specific conclusions, because instead of penalties, he was awarded Putin. In 2015, he signed Gazprom a contract for Nord Stream 2, which was a strategic objective of Russian policy, and the sending of gas to make it not have those values which are tied to being a transit country for that, to also depend other countries from Russian gas and dependent on Russian gas, which we see he did later as a tool of and a kind of weapon and a tool of pressure in the civilized world, democratic world. And also, without basis, he was expecting on additional billions of euros and dollars, which will strengthen the Russian budget for the use for the modernization of the Russian army, but also corruption activities and broadly applied tools to weaken the Western world. If we look at it on what happened after 2014, after the next aggression and crimes of Russia, which was directly, where Ukraine was directly hit, it's difficult not to imagine that what happened in February of last year wasn't, let's say, a natural, foreseeable consequence. This was mentioned by Ukrainian politicians or CEE country politicians who know Russia very well for ages. They know the imperial nature which exists in the authorities of that country, and they foresaw that that's what would happen. So when the Western world was surprised that last year in February missiles fell in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, women perished, children perished, innocent people, hospitals were bombed and destroyed. I hope that this time the world would react differently. And in this sense, I have to say that that hope became a fact, that the world reacted differently this time, that Ukraine received realistic support, that the scenario which was written that Kyiv was going to fall in 3 days did not happen, mainly for the reason that the Ukrainian nation and its patriotism courageously faced the Russian aggression and in a wise way directed its Ukrainian army and leadership. But also that there were some countries who immediately came to the aid of Ukraine, starting with the United States, President Biden, Boris Johnson in the UK, Poland, other countries of this region. There was a group of countries which decided to strongly support Ukraine, mainly through military support and weapons, ammunitions, everything that is necessary to defend against an attack, to show the attacker that the crime is not going to be worth it. But the element of that earlier reaction, which was missing, is also our meeting, our gathering. And as I mentioned, gives this additional uplifting of optimism that we're talking about an architecture of responsibility, penal, criminal responsibility for the perpetrators, which have touched so terribly the lives of many Ukrainians. We're also speaking to the perpetrators and addressing those who will continue, that the penalty will be unavoidable, that a crime will not be worth it, that the society of the free world will work together in solidarity with Ukraine. And also this is the activities of the Polish prosecutor's office, as Andrei mentioned, 4 days after the aggression of Ukraine in the Ukraine, I declared the initiation of an investigation of that, of course, in contact with the general prosecutor of Ukraine, and together with Estonia, Romania, Slovenia, Latvia, Lithuania, the ICC, we created a team and a task force which is starting investigations. We've already have testimonials of 1,700 witnesses. We also have photos, material recordings, films, and these activities are being undertaken. Our prosecutors were also in the Ukraine, and they will continue to come in line with requirements and the cooperation that will be required, which is necessary to document the crimes here. So we hope that we will come from the press conference and today and tomorrow richer with the considerations and thoughts of how to bring to Russian perpetrators, bring them to justice. We can't forget the atrocities from Irpin, from Bucha, from other Ukrainian cities. We have to give them the honor, their honor for justice, to their memories, and tying into President Kaczynski's statement that the after tomorrow will not happen. I hope that the international community will bring these perpetrators to justice for these terrible atrocities. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your strong belief that together we will do it. And now let me present our dear colleague and friend, Victoria Prentice, Attorney General for England and Wales and Advocate General for Northern Ireland. You know, Ukraine remains immensely grateful to the United Kingdom for its constant assistance. Attorney General Prentice, you had opportunity to visit Ukraine and with your eyes witness atrocities committed in course of this war. So why justice and accountability is important?
Well, Andre, I hope this one's working. I think we've heard this afternoon, and I think we all feel the weight of both history and emotion on our shoulders. So those of us particularly who are state prosecutors, oh boy, do we feel that weight. My predecessor, we've heard quoted this afternoon, Sir Hartley Shawcross opened at Nuremberg. I was taught by Hirsch Lauterpark's son, Ellie, and I bought his house. So I literally sit at his desk. So I feel that weight. We've also heard from many people this afternoon the weight of emotion, not least in that extraordinary speech from Mary Garland, but also merely looking at the photographs that were put up earlier and from all particularly of our Ukrainian hosts. It is clear that emotion is never far from the surface. So what do British people do when overwhelmed by history and emotion? They talk about the weather. So, I'd like you all to imagine a very sunny day, yesterday, with you. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. We don't really get them in the UK in the middle of winter, but there we were, in Bucha yesterday, and let me describe to you Bucha yesterday, because I think this is very important for how we understand what is actually happening with prosecution now. So it was a beautiful sunny day, the sky was blue. There is a very beautiful white church, recently repaired and very brightly painted, with an extraordinarily powerful and well-coordinated photography exhibition inside it. You haven't looked at the photographs yet. So you go outside and there is a flat churchyard. It is clean, it is well organized, and there is a memorial in one area where Andre and I laid a wreath. Less than 1 year ago, that was a pit with 116 bodies in it, including women and children. It is already covered over. Those bodies have been exhumed. They have been tested. In fact, a couple of months ago, when I was in The Hague, I saw some of the bones from those bodies being tested for DNA. Those people have been organized. We know who they are. We know what's happened to them. And in some cases, Andre and his colleagues have already prosecuted and already convicted those who did those dreadful things to the people in that graveyard. That in itself is extraordinary. We have never before had a war where we had contemporaneous war crimes prosecution going on. That is very important. I cannot believe that it will not affect the behaviour of the troops in this war. And it reminds all of us very, very hard how important justice and fairness and accountability are. So, Andrei, we salute you. I think everybody in this room from abroad salutes you. You have 70,000 open cases. You have already got people in prison following very fair trials, and we think you're amazing. So what of carrying on with this is too much for the Brits, so we just do practical things. The best thing we've done so far is give you our best war crimes judge. Sir Howard, where are you? Could you wave, please, or holler or something? So we gave him to you last May, and I think that was a useful gift because he has trained over 100 of your judges to run war crimes tribunals, something that frankly in our lifetime as prosecutors has not been necessary or not been widespread. There have of course always been specialists in The Hague and in some of the tribunals we've heard around the world, but most lawyers have not had to run a war crimes tribunal. But I think you're finding in Ukraine at the moment that that is something that will be commonplace for many judges. So we've given you Sir Howard, we've done the training, we're doing as much as we can on the practical level with mobile prosecutors. We know it's a difficult and dangerous job, and we salute you. But Andrei's web, his web up there, is much wider than the current prosecutions, and I think we should commend him for that. So accountability is much wider, and I think a web is a very good way of looking at it. It brings in the concept of different strands going their own way, but also the way in which they interlink and the way in which they can complement each other. So I think it's right that we continue to support the ICC. That is one strand. I think it's right that we in the UK support the core group on the creation of whatever the tribunal may end up exactly looking like. And I am committed to continue to work through some of those complicated legal issues, which we will need to do internationally if we are to have the best quality evidence before that tribunal. We also need to remember that there are other international courts of all kinds, in fact, seized with matters which pertain to Ukraine. And we need to really lean in with creative solutions to how we make reparations work. And that is what I'm now very much turning my mind to. So we've heard about the lawyers from this city, but there's some pretty good poets too. Witlin, a great poet, talked about let's play at Idols. Well, Ukraine to me before the war felt like an idyll. I was here 3 months before war started, visiting my daughter who worked in Ukraine. We lived normal Ukrainian life for a lovely holiday, very rare experience for a mother, particularly one who's a politician, to have time with a member of her family. So we went to the ballet, we had our nails done, we visited the churches, we talked about climate change. We sort of thought things were getting bad, but we had no idea what was going to happen. So we understand your need for that idyll to come back again. And the way to do that, poets can have idols, but lawyers have practical solutions. And so we Brits, who can't cope with emotion or history too much, will continue to come up with practical solutions, to continue to do what you ask us to do, and remember that underneath that practicality lies the rule of law and the international rules-based order, without which none of this works.
Thank you, dear Victoria. With this energy and commitment, we believe that together we will reach our aim. Close cooperation with European institutions is way forward in our quest for justice. And I'm glad to be joined by Laura Kövesi, European Chief Prosecutor. Dear Chief Prosecutor, in your view, how can the European Public Prosecutor's Office assist Ukraine in its quest for justice and accountability?
Thank you. Dear Mr. President, Your Excellencies, I'm not sure that you can hear me. I should keep it closer. Okay. Dear Mr. President, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here today, one that I would not waive for anything. I would like to thank our hosts, the free men and women of Ukraine, for defending all of us with the power of their will. Meetings like this one help shape a common understanding of the situation. Our Ukrainian friends have the necessary willpower, but the strength of their resistance to the Russian aggression depends widely on our support. It is one thing to declare it and another to provide it. It's one thing to express solidarity and another to express a commonality of faith. Few know that in June 1940, the government of Winston Churchill proposed the creation of a Franco-British Union with joint organs of defense, foreign, financial, and economic policies. This last attempt to prevent the imminent collapse of France under Nazi aggression came too late. One of the explanations put forward by Jean Monnet in his memoirs was that both nations, even their individual citizens, still believed in their heart of hearts that they could escape and survive alone by their own separate efforts. Today, we are once again witnessing an attempt at domination, putting the world in mortal danger. Are we wiser than our predecessors? Years from now, history will examine every choice we will have not made, every fact we will have chosen to ignore, and every responsibility we will have avoided. However, our grandchildren will also be learning about the choices we will have made based on the facts that we could not ignore. I hope they will draw inspiration from the way we have lived up to our responsibilities. In the coming days, far more qualified colleagues will expose the horrors of Russian aggression. You will discuss how to hold the perpetrators of all those crimes accountable. There is one fact that I cannot ignore. The Russian Federation is deporting thousands of Ukrainian children. Yes, deporting. These facts alone bring us back to the darkest hours of European history. This is why I wanted to be here today. Not only because Ukrainian lives are being sacrificed for the rest of us to live in peace. Not only because if Ukraine falls, Russia will not stop. And not only because the real objective of the aggressors is not territorial gain, but to divide Europe into spheres of influence, which would mean the end of European integration. I'm here to take a stand with you against the new avatar of radical evil. Ladies and gentlemen, in this situation, how can the European Public Prosecutor's Office do? We can help the Ukrainian authorities with investigations into fraud affecting the financial interest of the EU. As Prosecutor General Kostin had said on several occasions, in times of war, corruption is treason. The two of us have the same understanding of what is at stake. You maintain trust with consistency in fighting corruption. We have already established a framework for an effective cooperation. We are fully aligned. However, the EPPO could do much more to help. We act as a single office within a decentralized structure. No one has access to more information than we do. And compared to traditional cross-border coordination methods, we are much faster. We are the most powerful investigation and prosecution tool currently available in the EU when it comes to cross-border financial criminality. There is no better way for the EU to bring down the full force of its collective economic strength and criminal justice systems on those who assist in sanctions evasions. If the EPPO did not exist to defend the financial interest of the EU, we would have to invent it to ensure that EU restrictive measures are as painful as they should be. The EPPO is ready to fight criminals who conceal the origin, destination, or ownership of goods and assets falling under the EU sanctioned regime. This would help to slow down the Russian war effort, and with confiscation following prosecutions, even contribute to the financing of the reconstructions of Ukraine after the war. I hope you will understand why today in Lviv I cannot remain within the boundaries of judicial self-restraint. This is why, as the first European chief prosecutor, I am confident in the European Union institutions to take position on the Franco-German initiative to enlarge the scope of the EPPO's competence to the circumvention of EU restrictive measures. I am convinced the EPPO is ready and we should do it. Slava Ukraini. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Chief Prosecutor. Thank you, Laura. And what you have mentioned, and many of you, and many of our colleagues before, this war of aggression also opened not only gaps in the international law, but a lot of things which could be improved and which are improving now in many of our jurisdictions. I will just recall the word of Merrick, one of your prosecutors, whom I asked how many years you were expecting the law on extension of your jurisdiction with regard to war crimes, what you mentioned, and she told me 15 years. So for 15 years you were struggling to extend this jurisdiction, and you did it only now because of this war. So united means not only helping us, it's also we helping you, and this is also very important. And last but not least, we give the floor to our dear friend, partner and supporter, Beth Van Skak, Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice of the United States, who has been with us since very first day of Russia's aggression. Dear Ambassador, once again, welcome to Ukraine. And what is the United States doing on the diplomatic front to support comprehensive accountability for Russia's war of aggression and atrocities in Ukraine?
Thank you, dear Andre. Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, it's a real honor to be here as the 6th U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice. And like so many of us here, I too feel the power of place. Here in Lviv, this beautiful historic city that nurtured two great international lawyers who did so much to build today's system of international justice. All of us here know that winning the war, this terrible war, is not just about winning on the battlefield. We also must win the fight for justice. And this requires taking that fight to every venue, every jurisdiction, every court. It means strengthening our laws, as we have done now after an enormous amount of effort, and also opening our courtroom doors. And it means bolstering existing justice mechanisms around the world to ensure that perpetrators do not escape justice. The United States is, on a diplomatic front, contributing to, and we stand ready to continue to, support all documentation efforts that will lay the groundwork for justice, and supporting all existing pathways to justice. This includes, of course, first and foremost, cases being brought by you and your colleagues in Ukrainian courts, but also cases that might be brought in courts around the world when they can assert jurisdiction over those perpetrators that stand accused of committing the worst crimes known to humankind. Equally important is the critical work of the International Criminal Court, which occupies an essential place in the ecosystem of international justice. Dear Andre, I'm so honored and pleased to partner with you and your colleagues in your efforts to hold perpetrators accountable under the framework of the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group with the United Kingdom and the European Union. Under the ACA umbrella, we and our civil society implementing partners have deployed teams of multinational and multidisciplinary investigators and prosecutors to Ukraine, including to where sites of alleged war crimes have happened, to assist you in your critical efforts to document crimes, preserve evidence, engage witnesses and survivors in a trauma-informed way, prepare war crimes dossiers, and ultimately to pursue effective and fair cases in Ukrainian courts. In addition, to impose costs on malign actors, we in the United States, with partners and friends, are using our sanctions authorities in parallel to designate a wide array of individuals and entities responsible for carrying out and assisting Russia's acts of aggression. We have steadily declassified an unprecedented amount of information to inform the world of Russia's actions and to counter intense disinformation. In my public remarks, I often emphasize that we are at an historic moment in international justice. Today's efforts reflect the tremendous legacy of Nuremberg and Tokyo, established after World War II, the contributions of the ad hoc tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, where I started my career in this field, and the establishment of a permanent international criminal court. These were times when the world came together to deliver justice to those who most deserved it. And I'm proud that the United States has played a central role in all of these efforts. At Nuremberg, for example, as was mentioned, the United States led the prosecution for the crime of aggression, then deemed crimes against the peace in the lexicon of the era. And again now, as affirmed by the Attorney General, the United States welcomes efforts by the international community to ensure accountability for the crime of aggression committed against Ukraine. These are crimes that assault the very principles that the UN Charter was designed to uphold: sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and the right of all of us to live a life of peace and of dignity. We will work with Ukraine and close partners to find the most effective and legally sound way to accomplish this goal, including through the establishment of a justice mechanism for that purpose. These efforts must be mindful of the legal norms cultivated by all of us this past century and faithful to our most deeply held values. To lay the foundation for prosecutions of the crime of aggression, we welcome steps that can be taken now, while these various options are under consideration. And in this regard, we're very pleased to have participated in the meetings of the core group to launch the new International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression, based at Eurojust in The Hague. As conceptualized, this initiative will cultivate the investigation of acts of aggression and also build criminal dossiers for future trials against those leaders responsible for planning, preparing, initiating, and waging this terrible war of aggression. As envisioned, the ICPA's efforts will be complementary to existing justice pathways. In other words, the information that it gathers could also assist the International Criminal Court, domestic courts, It can also inform future sanctions designations and the pursuit of compensation related to the tremendous damage caused by Russia's aggression that will be collected by this new registry of damages being stood up now. As the first post-World War II institution to actively investigate the crime of aggression, such a center will advance accountability for this crime in the context of an egregious set of facts that is a manifest violation of the UN Charter. Finally, today we welcome the establishment of the dialogue group that has been announced and which is aimed at enhancing multilateral coherence of action across accountability. We are proud to participate in that group and look forward to working with all of you to advance justice. Mr. Prosecutor General, this is truly a make or break moment for the system of international justice. Just as the Allies at the end of the Second World War advanced the imperative of justice and ushered in a new era of international accountability, the duty now falls to all of us here to ensure that the promises of Nuremberg are not mere history. The United States remains unwavering in its support of the government of Ukraine and its people as they defend their country and their freedom. The people of Ukraine deserve justice, and we all must remain united in holding those responsible to account, no matter how long it takes. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Ambassador. Thank you, Beth. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And apology for running out of time. This opening session showed us that the issue of accountability as well as cooperation to attain this accountability is a cornerstone of both international and domestic legal agenda. I just want to ask you to thank again our esteemed panelists.
Thanks. Thanks to all distinguished panelists, and I want to inform you that we still have 2 panels forward, and we are still, I would say, critically out of our timeline. So I would ask you, again, don't take me rude, to strict the timeline, because I think nobody in this room wants to be